So we have no will, there's no trust, there's no anticipating at all the possibility of dying, and it's understandable at that age. So there were not even the discussions that sometimes you would have that might affect a court later in deciding what intentions were. In this case, we have the law of California regarding intestate succession.
Welcome to Life's Third Act, an enlightening look at estate planning, retirement, and beyond.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. This week, we're going to talk about Bruce Lee. Now, I hope there's no one out there that says, who in the heck is Bruce Lee? But Bruce Lee is an icon. And because I believe you all know about that, we're going to kind of plunge into a little bit about his history. We'll also talk briefly about, some of his accolades, his achievements, various things that by which he made his mark. And he's still a legend today. So we want to kind of set the table to talk about what happened when he died. There was some controversy about his death. There's still a bit of controversy about his death. But what's more interesting to me is to talk about kind of what happened to his estate after that. It's encouraging and inspiring. And in many ways, we can learn something about, how do you manage, how do you prepare for the possibility that you die young versus, the 90 something we all plan on. So we'll talk a little bit about the unique course that the legend and the brand of Bruce Lee has taken. So, Sherry, shall you get us started? Before we do that, let me remind you all that it's important for you to indicate you like this if you do, and also to subscribe to the channel. You hear this from everything you watch on YouTube. You hear this message, and it's because the message is important. I mean, those of us who do put in, and not just me, but more of my team, put in a lot of work putting this together, and we really, really try to impress you, to entertain you, to teach you. So all this is very important to us, and often we don't know if we're succeeding. And the best way for us to know is for you to let us know through comments also are welcome. Give us your comments, give us your feedback, but also that like and subscribe. One other thing I want to mention before we start is, Cordell has an estate planning group. The estate planning group, we're in cities around the country. We don't have our attorneys that do the estate planning in all of our offices, but we have people available in many, either directly or indirectly. So we want to let you know through this channel also that Cordell does, yes, family law. And family law includes not just domestic relations matters, not just matters relating to disputes in families and custody and all that, but also estate planning things. I mean, these are for those relationships that go well and you want to plan for your children. And of course, it is as important when things go bad and you're planning for the security of yourself and your children. So estate planning is a big factor. So it's a natural alliance or partnership between our litigation lawyers and domestic relations. And incidentally, if you mentioned that you got this message from this show, there's a 10%, is it?
15.
15, whoa.
Yeah, 15,
okay.
15, woo.
So we're handing away money here, but it is a real discount. And if you disclose that you came to us through this, then yeah, we'll happily give you that 15% discount. So with that, let's get started. Sherry, set the stage for talking about Bruce Lee's balance of life.
Well, like you said, he is a legend, and this episode is legendary for us because it is our 200th episode.
Oh, yeah.
So pretty exciting.
And it doesn't seem like it's been 200 episodes.
Time
now,
flies.
Justin, does that include, we had the show on radio for several years, and then we moved it off that to have our own channel. Does the 200 include those?
No, it doesn't include the radio. So if you include the radio, it's been going on for much longer than that.
The 2000th episode. We'll add a note at the back.
Not quite 2000, but I can tell you this, since we did it probably 3 years, 50 or so episodes to that. So you ought to do that math. But just in terms of streaming, we're at
Yes.
200, right?
We sure
Correct.
are. And today, like you said, it's all about Bruce Lee. He is a legend, one that I know for me, I had no idea he was actually born in America. But he was. November 27th, 1940, San Francisco. His dad just happened to be in town, his mom and dad, with the opera company. So that's why that happened. They were here for just a short time before they went back. And he was then raised in Hong Kong. And he soon became a child actor because, I mean, his dad was in the opera. So obviously there's some talent there, even though, as far as I know, Bruce, I don't think he put out any albums of opera, did he? I didn't see any of that.
Hey, something tells me, though, that he could do ballet quite well were he to try it.
I bet.
So fleshing that out a little bit, it was a Cantonese opera company that was traveling. And I don't know what Cantonese opera is, but I'm assuming that ties in with the mainland, with the Canton area of China, in which case both of his parents were employed in this role. And apparently they both have some sort of musical or some sort of artistic ability in that way. Now, I think the father was the performer, and I think the mother was involved in an administrative role. But they both were traveling with this company, and so it was just fortuitous that here we have Bruce Lee born in this country, and as a result, an issue that's hotly contested right now, whether you should have birthright citizenship, that's being challenged now, and there's discussion legislatively whether that's a good idea, and we could do a show talking about that. Some would find it interesting, and others would ban us forever from their favorites list. So, but it is worth mentioning, though, that because Bruce Lee was in town for this event in San Francisco, he was a citizen of the United States, even though he returned and was raised in Hong Kong.
Yep.
Go ahead and
it just
continue.
takes a moment, right? I mean, babies decide to come when they decide to come. So here he was in America. And like you said, raised in Hong Kong, became a child actor. He was in over 20 films. And he went to martial arts. So, of course, he started in doing that. His dad, I think, helped him get into that a little bit. But then he had other coaches, if you will, or whatever they call the instructors with that form of karate that he got into. Then he, like I said, began acting in films as a kiddo, and he trained in Wing Chun Kung Fu. And that was under a man by the name of Yip Man at the age of 13. Then he started winning championship. He had a lot of energy and a lot of charisma, and I'm sure that probably trickled down from his dad due to the fact that, he was there in the opera performing. So I don't think he fell too far from the tree when it came to entertainment.
No, he had this special charisma that really lit up the screen, and he had that quality that when he was in a scene, he would dominate that scene. And that's this intangible thing that some actors have. You just can't explain it, but you put them in a scene and, all eyes go to them. So he had that, and he did have this face that people were just drawn to him as a performer.
Definitely. But he did, with all of his training, as a young guy, I guess he kind of had a bit of a temper, and he did get into some street fights and, got in some trouble. And his mom actually covered up some of that trouble from dad, from what I understand. And she kind of pushed the idea to get him back to America. I thought that would be a good thing for him.
That was an insightful parental decision. He wasn't going in a good direction in Hong Kong. Yeah. And his mother recognized that, better to take the risk on sending him to America. And maybe things will go dramatically better. And they did. He came to America. He came to go to college. So he was probably, 17 or 18 when he came?
And I mean, that obviously was a good thing because he also ended up meeting his future wife there. And he started teaching martial arts, and he opened up make sure I pronounce this right, Jun Fan Gung Fu Institute in Seattle. Maybe I'm close. He later expanded that school to Oakland and Los Angeles. So here he is teaching. He ended up teaching some pretty famous folks like Steve McQueen, also Kareem Abdul-Jabbar over the years, and James Coburn. So people were talking about him and the lessons in his school. He also created Jeet Kune Do, rejecting traditional rigid forms of the martial arts field. So he was a little bit of a, I guess, kind of a rebel, if you will, when it came to the traditions of some of those kung fus.
Yeah. He did develop a style of doing, I guess it'd be a form of kung fu / karate that was less formal and more practical. And he branded it, and it became his, and he taught it in these 3 schools. But his reputation grew indirectly through Hollywood word of mouth. And that's how he ended up becoming somebody on the set advising and training these actors to do these scenes. He had this winsome personality. He just had the package. And if he had been simply as good as he is and lacked his charm, his wit, his intelligence, just all those things that together counted for his popularity, we never would have heard of him. So it's not enough to simply have, for example, a lot of personality and no talent. And then, of course, the reverse you can have. These are often people we don't hear about because they didn't have that package, and he did. And so he was on fire to succeed. When he came to America, he got serious while he was going to college. Did he complete his 4-year degree?
You know what? I want to say he did, but now I
have
don't.
Justin look that up.
Yeah,
while we're talking.
I think it was in something. I think it was in drama, wasn't it?
Well, that would be fitting.
Yes.
Anyway, so my point is,
Washington of Seattle, majored in philosophy, drama, and psychology.
Okay.
He did not complete his degree, though.
Yeah, well, it apparently didn't hurt him. So
no,
so he, but he became a man on fire, a young man on fire to succeed. And between doing these schools and pursuing these private training sessions, which some of them came through the school, but others came through, he was in the Rolodex of the producers, directors, and others who are putting together movies, and they want to train their stars to be able to make these credible, these scenes that appeared persuasive. And Bruce Lee went from that to being in scenes. And so he didn't get much credit for those where he just appeared. But very soon he ends up getting a chance to do a movie. And that was really the start. So he's really known for, 5? I think there were 5, maybe 6 movies.
Yeah, the first one, though, the Green Hornet, where he was kind of like the co-host.
Oh, yeah.
So 1966 to 67, it was only a year, but he got a lot of fame in Hong Kong cinema for that, the Green Hornet. And
yeah, a lot of people
things.
don't talk about that movie because, he wasn't the lead role in that, et cetera. But
he shined.
Yeah, he shined, and that's what brought him to the attention of the public as well as studios. So let's talk though about his key movies and when those happened and what they were about.
See, he produced, wrote, directed, and starred in Way of the Dragon in 1972, and that also had Chuck Norris. That was a big one. And then in 1973, Enter the Dragon, which sadly he did not get to see in theaters because he passed. I think it was just maybe 3 weeks or so before the movie came out.
And he was such a talented guy. I mean, the fact that you can go that quickly. I mean, he's 30 years old at that point. And the fact that you can go that quickly into directing and writing a movie. I mean, it just is, and co-producing. It's amazing that he got to that point so fast. And a movie that ended up being very popular around the world.
Yes,
Chuck Norris, of course, goes on to big things. Chuck Norris was really, at that time, he would have been cheap to get as an actor. And later he became, if not an A grade, a B grade actor.
And that movie, that Enter the Dragon, it is still one of the most profitable movies of all time, like $400 million. So it's doing well still today.
Yeah.
Very popular.
I mean, he has this cult following that has just mushroomed, and it seems to be transmitted from one generation to another. Because here we are, 3-4 generations later from his death, and people still are fans.
I see his face on T-shirts all the time, to the point where I was like, I had no idea he had passed at such a young age. I thought he was much older.
So let's talk then about his move from California with his family back to Hong Kong. First, let's talk about his family.
Okay. So he married Linda Lee Caldwell. She was an American teacher, author, and they met at the University of Washington. They married in 1964, and they remained married until his, passing. So they were together 9 years. They had 2 children together, the first being Brandon Bruce Lee, their son. He was born in 1965, and sadly, there's, tragedy for the son too, which some thinks there was a hex on the family. But he passed away at the age of 28. And he lost his dad at the age of 8, but then he passed himself at 28. And their daughter, Shannon Emery Lee, she was born in 1969, and she's still alive today. She's about probably 56 years old now. She's an actress, producer, and CEO of Bruce Lee Enterprises, also manages the estate and Bruce Lee Foundation.
Yeah, and the mother is still,
still alive.
Linda
So
is
she's
still
probably
living.
about 80.
Yeah. So, all right. So the family, Bruce Lee and his very young family decide to move from California back to Hong Kong. And that would have been in 72?
Yes, 1972.
Yeah. So let's talk about the reasons for that move. Bruce Lee was not given the level of control that he wanted in Hollywood. Though he was successful, he was young, and he hadn't reached the point where in Hollywood they were prepared to give him the reins the way he felt he should have the chance.
Well, and you got to remember, in the 70s, you still had racism, and even for him to have gotten married to his wife, they were different races, so it wasn't easy for them either to admit that they were together for a while.
That's true. We forget that. I can easily forget that because we live in a world where we don't notice that. Mm-hmm. But that probably would have been a problem in that era, getting a job or getting positions and whatnot. So anyway, he finds out, and he does have these connections in Hong Kong from his youth, and he knew that if he went there, he had an investor who was prepared to partnership with him, and we'll talk about him in a minute. And so this was a chance where he could have more control, and he could have an opportunity to do some things, including fight scenes and whatnot, that he felt that there wasn't the patience at the cost per hour using studio time in Hollywood. So there's a question as to whether this move was intended to be permanent. Now, we should mention here, and we'll return to this, but when they moved, they sold pretty much everything in the United States. They had some things that they kept, they stored or had with friends, but that their house, their cars, those were sold. So when they moved to Hong Kong in 72, it appeared that this was a permanent decision, that they expected to live there, that was going to become their home. But later, Linda said, after the death of Bruce, she said that it was not their intention to stay permanently there. And they said there's still a domiciliary, as it's called, a legal term, of California. And that's relevant in some tangential ways in terms of being eligible to administer an estate and do some other things that that were relevant after Bruce's death. She wanted to establish that no, we're still Californians by residence. Now, one thing that we'll come back to is that Hong Kong at the time was not part of China. And those of us who are closer to my age, of course, assume it's still not part of China because we didn't think of it as being part of China. We thought of it as a possession of the British Empire. And now they're later called dependent territories. So a person who is for lack of a better word, a citizen of Hong Kong, and Bruce was. I mean, he'd spent his life there. His family were citizens there, so he easily qualified. They were considered a British Dependent Territories citizen. So, British Dependent Territories citizen. And in that role, it meant that he had opportunities there that he wouldn't have had if he hadn't been a resident. If you had simply come from California and decided to set up shop there to create movies, you'd hit some roadblocks. But at the time, this was smooth sailing for him to go there and have the fruits of being a U.S. citizen, and at the same time qualifying for essentially citizenship there in Hong Kong. So he goes there and he's working on, I guess would be his last movie.
Enter the Dragon.
Yeah, Enter the Dragon. So now let's talk about how he came to his death.
Well, sadly, he collapsed in an apartment and it was the apartment of his mistress, supposedly.
Well, probably not great shock, but go ahead.
But I'm always hopeful, that there's not that going on. But anyway, she's an actress as well, Betty Ting. Apparently, he had taken a painkiller for a headache, and the cause ruled of his passing as cerebral edema brought on by the heat. There was a lot of heat. Heat stroke was another cause that was listed because he did pass on one of the hottest days of the year. So there's a lot of different takes on what caused his death. But I've seen many places that he had been complaining of headaches leading up to his death.
And there had been a previous incident where he had passed out on a set or during a rehearsal. So there was something going on probably in his brain that recurred and fatally the second time. But they think it is triggered in part by this medication he was taking. So his death occurred July 20th, 1973. And this drug is equagesic. Mm-hmm. So equagesic apparently is a combination of aspirin and a barbiturate type drug. And this is not prescribed much anymore because there are risks of things such as this happening. And it has very addictive. At the time, in the 60s and 50s when this was used very, very commonly, there was less concern about addiction. And barbiturates, was not something that had labels and warnings the way it came to be. And so this drug, though, when he took it, while it wasn't necessarily known, it wasn't known to cause that effect in most people. It was known, and we know now that it could, and it did. So the official cause was death by misadventure. That's a British Empire thing.
Oh.
Death by misadventure.
Adventure. Okay.
So it just means death by things going wrong, for lack of specificity. But this thing about cerebral edema, it's where your brain swells, and that's something when you're at certain altitudes, that's a big risk. Mountain climbers have that, and the only fix for it is to go down. Apparently, it can be triggered by a lot of heat, and maybe this drug contributed to that. It wasn't what you would call a drug overdose. He wasn't overdosed.
It was a combination
It was a combination of this. The aspirin component probably didn't explain it. It probably was this other barbiturate, which was meprobamate, as if anybody cares. But it's a sedative and a tranquilizer. It's not technically a barbiturate. Apparently, it's related to barbiturates, but it's now rarely prescribed. It's not forbidden, but it's now rarely prescribed. They think that he just had this. I'm reading another comment this was a consensus of modern medical experts that he had a hypersensitivity reaction to this meprobamate or to the combination that could have caused this cerebral edema. But the most direct cause, or the most direct effect that killed him was the swelling of the brain, cerebral edema. Such a shame. I mean, a guy who had such a long way to go. And you wonder, was this susceptibility the result of maybe incidents that happened when he was younger? We don't know. Yeah. But it could tie in with his training, blows he had taken. He had been in a number of street fights, this trouble that you referred to earlier. Yeah. So blows would have occurred then, I suspect, to his head. So you can't help but think that some of this could be related to what we now consider concussions from football and other sports. Now we know the vulnerability of the brain to these sorts of blows. And you suspect, one has to suspect, that these blows that he doubtlessly took that were not recognized as concussions at the time, now we know you can be concussed without passing out fully. You can have effects that people would never associate with that injury later. And it can be fatigue, it can be confusion. And I suspect, cerebral edema could result under the right circumstances after such blows. So I didn't see this discussed, this particular piece, in other words, the fights that he had as a youth, but I suspect that that's a factor. Anyway, so let's move forward. He passes away, so he's leaving behind a wife and 2 children.
Yeah, two little ones. I mean,
two very small children.
Yeah, his daughter would have been 4 and his son 8 at the time. So little ones.
So before we talk further about what happened after his death, there are some conspiracy theories relating to the cause of death that say, no, it's not the things that I just described, but rather there was skullduggery at work.
Yes.
Tell us briefly about those theories.
Well, one is about the mistress, and perhaps she poisoned him. So that was that Betty Ting Pei.
That conspiracy theory is based on the idea that he was leaving her, that he was going to end the relationship and be monogamous with his wife.
Maybe. Yeah, I didn't see much.
Go on.
I didn't see much detail in that, but there's these theories. So there's also Raymond Chow. He was his partner and producer in the movie business, and then there's a Lo Wing director that he actually had a public feud with, who may have had something to do with it. And then there's also the mob theory that maybe they, had him taken out.
There is, the Chinese version of organized crime is called what? The triads?
Yes.
Okay, something like the triads. Mm-hmm. And I think that theory goes related to his insisting on control. Some have suggested that Chow, perhaps others who are investing in his projects, they were concerned about how the rights would be secured, who gets what jobs on the set, just for all the things that you could imagine arguing about in producing and getting profit from a movie. And it's true that Bruce Lee was very independent. He was insisting on a lot of control. He insisted from the very early days, less success when he wasn't known, but more power and influence later. And that his decision to leave Hollywood and come to Hong Kong, it did give him more opportunity for control. But there he was against forces that wanted to assure the benefits accruing to certain people being employed during the process, as well as how profits are distributed. So that's a theory. I don't believe either of those theories, but
they're out there.
It is odd that a guy his age dies with no more previous history of a problem than the one we mentioned.
Yeah, and in great shape. I mean, you can't say he was like, overweight or anything like that. I mean, he was.
And the theory about the drug, as I mentioned, this drug still is use. It's not illegal in most countries. I'm sure it's illegal in some countries, but it's more controlled now because it's considered a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 narcotic. So I think that it's not as if now we know, oh yeah, that regularly causes this problem. We don't. This problem is a very unusual thing. It's certainly believed that it can cause it, and I suspect that there are cases where they did happen. But if they happen 1 in 100,000 or 1 in 500,000 or a million, several million, then you have to wonder, is it possible that there's some other explanation? I think that's what's happened with people who've asserted these theories, is that they believe that this can't be explained simply by taking this drug when he didn't overdose on the drug. So there we go. We put it before our audience. I tend to believe that, yeah, it was an odd thing. It wasn't a common side effect from this drug. But I think it is more believable in his case because of the circumstances with his health previously. And by previously, I'm not talking about having a similar cerebral event. I'm talking about the blows and all those things that we now know. You have so much more vulnerability to brain injury. All right, so let's move into what happened when he passes away. There are 2 estates open because he has assets. Remember, we have some things lingering in California, not much, but then he has these things going on in Hong Kong. So we know that the main asset in the state of California, it's interesting to go back and try to pull this probate records. It's difficult to do because it's a long time ago and these records go in storage. But we did find cases, and I'll talk about one in a minute, that refer to the estate documents. So I didn't have to actually pull the will itself that was probated, not the will, but the estate that was probated back in 73 here in California. I can't access the documents from Hong Kong, but I can tell you that California asserted claim over the one asset that it had here, the far and away the most important asset it had here, and that's really these shares of stock in what was called Concord Productions. And Concord Productions was the partnership that Bruce Lee had formed with Raymond Chow. And there may have been a few other shareholders, we're not sure, but we know Bruce was a co-founder and owned a substantial part of the stock. So that stock it's through an American entity. So we know that was considered under the jurisdiction of California. And California did award those shares as well as any other, it's called rights of publicity, ROP. It's a little unusual. Now I think you can safely use synonymously NIL, name, image, and likeness. Everybody now knows what that is since these things have been developed in college athletics. So in this case, though, the court awarded both the rights themselves and then also the shares. So anything that's not incorporated, and lots of things would not have been incorporated under Concord Production alone, those additional rights, we'll call them name, image, likeness, those things would go to the family too. And California felt it had the jurisdiction to award those things based on his citizenship here and the domiciliary status that the wife argued was the case. And when I say the wife, I'm talking about Linda. So the only tangible assets were pretty much personalty, memorabilia, etc. So these ended up being worth a lot of money later. They weren't sold initially. Linda, to her credit, made a lot of good decisions, and that's going to be a theme of our discussion, is that Linda, I think, and then Shannon turned out to be capable stewards of the memory of Bruce Lee. And we know stories where it didn't go that well. Remember Buddy Holly? Buddy Holly's young wife, younger, granted, than Linda, but still not that much younger. And she didn't fully appreciate that Buddy Holly could become a legend and could produce income for many years to come. Now, one could say, in fairness, that it was not any more obvious that Bruce Lee would become that icon that he's become. It wasn't obvious then. And I think to us, we think it is because he did have some fame. He had some movies that had sold well. certainly, but nothing like what was going to happen after his death. So I'm impressed that Linda, she summoned all of the resources and other things that she needed. She reached out and got the people involved she needed to assure that his estate was going to be handled correctly and that they were not going to allow people to violate this intellectual property. And so we have the personal effects, and she ends up selling those eventually. And I'm sure I know they yielded a lot of money at auction. You can still look those up. You can still find Bruce Lee stuff being sold at auction. And I want to come back to the shares, though, because they really did represent most of the value at that time, far and away in America. So those shares, we don't know whether there was a buy-sell agreement, but we know that there was a deal later in which the estate ended up selling the shares, the interest that they had in these movies, sold them to Raymond Chow. And so Raymond Chow at that point owned certainly the majority of the shares once that transfer took place. And then subsequently, those shares were conveyed, I believe, according to the corporate trail that we could piece together, that was transferred to what became Golden Harvest. And then ultimately, there was another entity, which we'll come to in a minute, I'll talk about, who now owns those rights, unless they've been transferred since I did this last research, which I doubt. But so we have these shares. What were they worth? Well, we think the estate was valued around $10 million. Remember, we're talking about somebody who was 32 years old. We should talk about the estate planning that was in place, which was none. So we have no will. There's no trust. There's no anticipating at all the possibility of dying. And it's understandable at that age. So there were not even the discussions that sometimes you would have that might affect a court later in deciding what intentions were. In this case, we have the law of California regarding intestate succession. And intestate succession would have given the assets 25% to each child and then 50% to the surviving spouse. So this total of 25, 25, and 50 was shared as to the value that he owned of a Concord. So when that was eventually sold, it took about 4 years. The state remained open for a long time because there were issues with taxes. They thought that there was around $10 million in value. But I don't know that was ultimately what the IRS concluded. That was simply what one court cited or referred to in a later case. But let's say it was $10 million. Well, $10 million at that time, imagine how much that would be today in fairness. I can tell you, I checked this using CPI.
Okay.
You would that equivalent purchasing power today would be about 76.4 million. So call it 76 million. So $76 million, a 32-year-old man, that's a lot of money. And it didn't reflect the real potential. Okay, as we commonly do, we're going to stop here and we're going to take this topic, Bruce Lee, and we're going to divide it into two shows. So the first half here, we've spent time talking about his life, his legacy, a little bit about, thereafter and his death. But we want to pick up now with his estate, with what happened in the actually generations in his family after his death. So this has been Life's Third Act. And until next time, take care.
We hope you enjoyed Life's Third Act, sponsored by Cordell and Cordell, your advisors for estate planning and beyond. Subscribe and join us weekly for thought-provoking discussion and topics exclusively focused on estate planning and your financial future. Discover more at CordellCordell.com. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.